The flashing red and blue lights in a rearview mirror usually signal nothing more than a ruined evening and a costly ticket. Yet for a young black teenager driving alone along a dark, deserted stretch of road in an affluent and unforgiving suburb, those same lights can mean the absolute end of everything. What happens when the very people sworn to protect become the monsters hiding in the shadows? Two arrogant officers crossed a line they could never uncross. They brutally assaulted a boy who seemed like an easy target, never realizing that the blood on their hands belonged to the only son of the state's attorney general. This is the story of an ultimate betrayal of power and the devastating, cold-blooded karma that followed. Malik Vance adjusted the volume on the radio of his older Honda Civic, letting soft jazz drift through the worn speakers. He was exhausted. The day had been grueling, split between advanced architecture seminars at the state university and a late shift at the studio where he was finalizing a massive physical model for his midterms. His eyes felt heavy with the kind of fatigue that settles deep into the bones, yet his mind remained at peace. He was nearly home. He drove through Ridgewood, a wealthy, sprawling suburb of towering oak trees, manicured lawns, and sprawling estates hidden behind wrought iron gates. It was not his neighborhood, but it was the fastest route from the university campus to the downtown high-rise where he lived. Malik was a good kid, an Eagle Scout, an honor student, someone who deliberately chose to drive his older cousin's hand-me-down Civic rather than ask his wealthy father for a luxury car. He wanted to earn his way. He wanted to stay invisible and grounded. But in Ridgewood, a beat-up Civic driven by a young black man at night was never invisible. It was a beacon. Hidden in a concealed driveway behind a thick hedge of hydrangeas sat a Ridgewood police cruiser. Inside were Officer Brody Kane and Officer Trent Quinn. Kane was a veteran whose early idealism had long since rotted into deep-seated cynicism and unchecked prejudice. Quinn was a new officer, eager to please and desperate to mirror the hardened, street-tough persona his senior partner projected. "Check this out," Kane muttered, lowering his half-eaten sandwich as Malik's Civic rolled past the intersection. The car obeyed the speed limit to the letter and came to a complete stop at the stop sign. "What do we got?" Quinn asked, leaning forward, his hand instinctively resting on the terminal keyboard. "A roll-in probable cause," Kane sneered. "Look at the rust on that quarter panel. You think a kid driving that piece of junk lives up in the heights? He's casing the neighborhood. I can smell it." Quinn watched the receding taillights. "He stopped at the line, Brody. We don't have a violation." Kane shot the rookie a look of pure disdain. "You want to be a real cop, Trent? Or do you want to be a crossing guard? You make the violation. Watch the passenger side rear tire. It touched the solid white line. Failure to maintain lane. Light him up." Kane slammed the cruiser into drive. Tires squealed as they pulled out of the hidden driveway. Within moments, the predatory roar of the police engine shattered the quiet suburban night. The cruiser closed the distance aggressively, riding inches from Malik's bumper before Kane hit the switches. The dark road was instantly bathed in a strobing, violent wash of red and blue light. In the Civic, Malik felt his stomach drop. The sudden burst of light in his mirrors was blinding. He immediately checked his speedometer. He checked his lights. He had not been swerving. Despite knowing he had done absolutely nothing wrong, the familiar, suffocating wave of anxiety washed over him. His father had given him the talk when he was a boy, a master class in survival drilled into his head with terrifying clarity. "Keep your hands on the wheel at 10 and 2. Do not make any sudden movements. Comply with the instructions, even if they are unlawful. Survive the encounter on the street. I will destroy them in the courtroom." Malik activated his turn signal and slowly pulled over onto the wide shoulder beneath a flickering amber street lamp. He shifted the car into park, turned off the engine, turned off the radio, and rolled down all four windows, a gesture meant to show absolute transparency. He placed his hands firmly on the top of the steering wheel and waited, his heart hammering against his ribs. In the cruiser, Kane unclipped his radio. "Dispatch, Unit 44. Traffic stop on a silver Honda. License plate Romeo Tango 7922. Occupied ×1. Ridgewood Boulevard and Elm." Kane stepped out, adjusting his heavy utility belt. He did not unholster his weapon, but he rested his right hand firmly on the grip. Quinn mirrored his partner, stepping out on the passenger side and unhooking his heavy metal flashlight. The approach was deliberately slow, designed to maximize intimidation. As Kane reached the driver's side window, he shone his powerful flashlight directly into Malik's eyes, blinding him instantly. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Kane barked, skipping any formal greeting or explanation for the stop. Malik squinted, turning his face slightly away from the blinding beam while keeping his hands glued to the wheel. "Good evening, officer. My wallet is in my back right pocket, and the registration is in the glove compartment. I need to reach for them. Is that all right?" Kane scoffed, leaning in closer. The smell of stale coffee and tobacco drifted into the car. He did not like the kid's tone. It was too calm, too articulate. Kane preferred fear. He fed on nervous stammering and panicked compliance. Calmness, to a cop like Kane, was perceived as defiance. "I didn't ask for a speech, boy. I asked for your papers. Get them." "Yes, sir," Malik replied, keeping his voice perfectly level. He slowly removed his right hand from the steering wheel and reached across his body toward the glove compartment. Quinn, standing on the passenger side, tapped his flashlight aggressively against the roof of the car. "Hey, keep your movements slow. Don't try anything stupid." Malik popped the glove box. It was a mess of old receipts, napkins, and a few loose CDs. He reached in, his fingers brushing against a dark plastic case holding his sunglasses to get to the yellow registration envelope beneath it. "Gun! He's reaching!" Quinn suddenly screamed, his inexperienced nerves completely snapping as the shadows in the glove box played tricks on his eyes. Before Malik could even process the words, the situation erupted into sheer, unadulterated chaos. Kane did not verify the threat. He did not assess. His training was completely overridden by adrenaline and inherent bias. He lunged through the open window, grabbing a fistful of Malik's jacket and the collar of his shirt. "Get out of the car! Get out of the car right now!" Kane roared, his voice cracking with rage. "Officer, it's just my registration," Malik gasped as the heavy fabric of his jacket twisted against his windpipe. The lock clicked as Kane forced his arm inside, opening the door from the inside. With a violent, twisting heave, Kane yanked Malik out of the driver's seat. Malik, weighing barely 160 pounds, was sent flying out of the vehicle, his shoulder slamming brutally into the cold, wet asphalt of the shoulder. Pain shot up his arm, but his father's voice echoed in his head. "Do not fight back. Do not give them an excuse." "I am not resisting. I am not resisting," Malik shouted, rolling onto his stomach and immediately placing his hands flat on the pavement, spreading his legs wide. It was a posture of total surrender. But surrender was not what Kane and Quinn wanted. They wanted submission, and they were riding the massive, intoxicating high of authorized violence. Quinn came sprinting around the rear of the vehicle, his heavy boots pounding the pavement. Before Malik could brace himself, Quinn drove his knee directly into the center of Malik's back, driving the air from his lungs in a sickening rush. Malik let out a choked gasp, his vision blurring. "Stop moving, you piece of trash! Stop resisting!" Kane yelled. Even though Malik was pinned motionless beneath the weight of the two grown men, Kane brought his fist down, striking Malik hard in the side of the ribs. Malik screamed in agony. Hands behind your back, Quinn demanded, grabbing Malik's right arm and wrenching it upward at an unnatural, agonizing angle. They're behind my back, sir, Malik wheezed, tasting the metallic tang of blood in his mouth. He had bitten his tongue when he hit the ground. Kane, frustrated that the suspect was not fighting back to justify the beating, decided to escalate. He unclipped his taser. Stop resisting, or you're going to ride the lightning. I'm complying, Malik cried out, tears of pain mixing with the rainwater on the asphalt. Kane pressed the muzzle of the taser against the back of Malik's thigh and pulled the trigger. 50,000 volts of electricity surged through Malik's nervous system. His muscles locked in an excruciating, involuntary spasm. He thrashed helplessly on the ground, a guttural scream tearing from his throat as the electricity burned into his flesh. See, he's fighting, Quinn shouted, using the involuntary muscle spasms as an excuse to deliver 2 heavy closed-fist strikes to the back of Malik's head. The world went dark for a fraction of a second. A high-pitched, deafening ringing filled Malik's ears. He felt the cold, hard steel of the handcuffs bite viciously into his wrists, clicked so tight they instantly cut off the circulation to his hands. Kane hauled him up by the chain of the cuffs, nearly dislocating Malik's shoulders. Blood streamed from a gash above Malik's left eye, blinding him on one side, dripping down his cheek and staining the collar of his gray shirt crimson. You thought you were smart, huh? Kane sneered, leaning his face inches from Malik's and spitting as he spoke. Coming into our town, mouthing off. You're nothing. Just another punk in a stolen car. It's my car, Malik managed to whisper, his head swimming, his knees threatening to buckle. Kane laughed maliciously, shoving Malik violently against the side of the cruiser. Yeah, we'll see about that. Search his pockets, Trent. Quinn patted him down aggressively, pulling out Malik's wallet, his cell phone, and his keys. He tossed them onto the hood of the cruiser and flipped open the wallet. Malik Vance, address downtown, Kane sneered. Just like I thought. Wrong side of the tracks. Throw him in the back. They shoved Malik into the cramped, hard plastic back seat of the police cruiser. He collapsed sideways, his bound hands screaming in pain, his ribs throbbing with every shallow breath. Through the wire mesh separating him from the front seat, he watched the 2 officers casually high-five each other. They were entirely unbothered. To them, this was not a tragedy. It was sport. As the cruiser sped toward the Westbridge County 4th Precinct, Malik closed his bleeding eyes. He did not cry. The fear had burned away, replaced by a cold, searing focus. They had made a mistake, a monumental, catastrophic mistake. They did not know who they had just beaten, and they had no idea the hellfire that was about to rain down upon their lives. The Westbridge County 4th Precinct was a brutalist concrete building that smelled of floor wax, stale sweat, and misery. Kane and Quinn frog-marched Malik through the heavy double doors into the booking area. Malik could barely walk. His left leg dragged slightly from the taser strike, and the right side of his face was swollen shut, a grotesque canvas of purple and black bruising. His designer jacket was torn and soaked in dirty street water and his own blood. Behind the elevated booking desk sat Desk Sergeant Harlan Brooks, a man just years away from a comfortable pension. He looked up from his paperwork, sighing as he saw the bruised and bleeding teenager. He had seen it 1,000 times before, Kane bringing in someone who tripped and fell during an arrest. Brooks never asked questions. It was not his job to police the police. It was his job to process the paperwork. What do we got, Brody? Brooks asked lazily, tapping his pen against the desk. Felony resisting, assaulting an officer, failure to comply, and we're looking into grand theft auto, Kane announced proudly, shoving Malik forward so he stumbled into the holding railing. Kid was a wildcat, lunged at Trent, had to use the taser to subdue him. Malik looked up at the sergeant through his one good eye. "That is a lie," he said clearly, his voice raspy but steady. "I never fought back. They pulled me from my car and beat me." "Shut your mouth," Kane snapped, slapping the back of Malik's head. "Hey, easy," Brooks muttered, mostly for the sake of the overhead security cameras. "Empty your pockets, kid." "They already did," Malik replied. "They have my wallet and phone." Quinn tossed the items onto the desk. Brooks began slowly logging them into the computer system. He did not bother looking closely at the ID. He just typed the name Malik Vance into the local database to check for outstanding warrants. Nothing came up. Clean as a whistle. "All right, Vance, we're going to toss you in holding cell 3 while we process the paperwork. You get one phone call," Brooks said, pointing to a heavy metal wall-mounted telephone at the end of the booking desk. Kane leaned against the counter, crossing his arms and grinning. "Who you going to call? Kid's mommy? Or you want the number for the public defender? They usually show up by Thursday if you're lucky." Quinn chuckled, sipping from a styrofoam cup of water. Probably going to call his gangbanger buddies to come bail him out. Malik ignored them. His hands were shaking violently as the handcuffs were finally unlocked, leaving deep purple indentations on his wrists. He massaged his hands, trying to get the blood flowing again. He walked slowly over to the wall phone. He did not need to look up a number. There was one number he had memorized since he was a child, a number he was told to use only in a matter of absolute life or death. It was a secure, unlisted line. It did not go to a secretary. It did not go to voicemail. Malik picked up the heavy receiver and punched in the 10 digits with a trembling, blood-stained finger. The phone rang once, twice. Kane and Quinn stood just feet away, smirking, waiting for the inevitable tears and pleading. On the third ring, a deep, authoritative voice answered. The voice was thick with sleep, but instantly sharp. "Vance." Malik swallowed hard. A tear finally broke free and tracked through the dried blood on his cheek. "Dad, it's Malik." On the other end of the line, hundreds of miles away in the state capital, Attorney General Roland Vance sat bolt upright in his bed. He was the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the state, a man renowned for his ruthless prosecution of corruption and organized crime. He possessed a mind like a steel trap and a temper that could freeze water. "Malik, where are you? What time is it?" Roland asked, his voice instantly losing the sleepiness, replaced by an intense, terrifying focus. He could hear the tremor in his son's voice. "I'm at the Westbridge County 4th Precinct," Malik said, keeping his eyes fixed on the dirty tile floor. "Dad, they pulled me over. I did exactly what you told me to do. I kept my hands visible. I didn't resist." Malik's voice finally cracked. "They hurt me, Dad. They beat me. They tasered me." Silence hung on the line for agonizing seconds. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a bomb arming. "Who?" Roland Vance's voice dropped an octave. It was no longer the voice of a concerned father. It was the voice of the Attorney General preparing an execution order. "2 officers, boss. Kane and Quinn," Malik replied. At the booking desk, Sergeant Harlan Brooks was looking at the intake form. He glanced at Malik's driver's license again. He looked at the address. It was not just a downtown high-rise. It was the penthouse suite of the most exclusive building in the city. Frowning, Brooks ran a deeper background check on the name Malik Vance, linking it to the immediate family records in the state database. The computer screen refreshed. Next of kin/parent, Roland A. Vance. Title, State Attorney General. Brooks stopped breathing. The pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the desk. All the blood drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. "Put the officer in charge on the phone. Right now," Roland commanded through the receiver. Malik lowered the phone from his ear. He turned to look at the 3 men. Kane was still grinning, oblivious. Quinn was checking his watch, but Sergeant Brooks was staring at the computer screen as if he were looking at a loaded gun pointed directly at his head. "He wants to speak to the desk sergeant," Malik said quietly, holding the receiver out. Kane snorted. "Oh, Daddy wants to talk to the manager." He swaggered over, snatching the phone from Malik's hand and holding it to his ear, leaning cockily against the wall. "Yeah, who is this?" "This is Roland Vance," the voice on the other end said, cold, measured, and practically vibrating with lethal intent. "To whom am I speaking?" "This is Officer Brody Kane, Mr. Vance. Your boy here is in a lot of trouble. He assaulted a police officer. You better bring your checkbook to bail him." "Officer Kane," Roland interrupted, his voice cutting through the cop's arrogance like a scalpel. "You have exactly seconds to hand the phone to your watch commander. If he is not on duty, you hand it to the highest-ranking officer in that building. You will not process my son. You will not speak to my son, because by the time the sun rises, you will no longer be a police officer. You will be a federal inmate." Kane frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Excuse me, who the hell do you think you are?" "Put the phone down!" The shout echoed through the booking room. It was not Malik. It was Sergeant Brooks. The older cop had practically vaulted over the desk, his eyes wide with a terror so pure it made Kane freeze. Brooks ripped the phone out of Kane's hand and pressed it to his own ear. "Sergeant Brooks speaking, sir," he stammered, his hands shaking so violently the heavy plastic receiver rattled against his ear. "Sergeant Brooks," the Attorney General said, the calmness of his tone far more terrifying than any yelling could be. "I am mobilizing the State Bureau of Investigation. They will be at your precinct in minutes. You are to secure Officers Kane and Quinn in holding cells immediately. You will confiscate their badges and weapons. If my son has a single new scratch on him when I arrive, I will personally see to it that your entire precinct is indicted under the RICO Act. Do you understand me?" Brooks swallowed, his throat dry as sandpaper. He looked at the bruised, bleeding boy standing quietly by the wall. He looked at Kane and Quinn, who were now staring at him in utter bewilderment. "Yes, Mr. Attorney General," Brooks whispered, the words echoing in the dead silence of the room. "Understood." Brooks hung up the phone. He slowly turned to face Kane and Quinn. The cocky grins had vanished from their faces. "Sarge?" Quinn asked tentatively. "What's going on? Who was that?" Brooks slowly drew his service weapon from his holster, pointing it directly at the chest of the veteran officer. "Kane. Quinn," Brooks said, his voice trembling with the realization that his career and the entire precinct had just been destroyed. "Hands on your heads. You're under arrest." For long seconds, the booking area of the Westbridge County 4th Precinct was as silent as a tomb. The only sound was the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the ragged, painful breathing of Malik Vance, who was leaning heavily against the concrete wall. Officer Brody Kane stared down the barrel of Sergeant Harlan Brooks's 9mm Glock. He let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh, though it lacked its usual bravado. "Harlan, put the damn gun down. Have you lost your mind? It's a prank call. It's some kid playing a joke." Brooks's hands were shaking, but his aim remained dead center on Kane's chest. A cold sweat had broken out across his forehead. "It wasn't a prank, Brody. The caller ID traced directly to the state capitol secure executive grid. The name in the database matches the kid's ID. He is Roland Vance's son. Now put your hands on your heads and step away from your weapons." Rookie Officer Trent Quinn's face crumpled. The adrenaline that had fueled his violent outburst on the side of the highway evaporated, leaving behind a cold, paralyzing terror. He did not hesitate. He immediately unbuckled his heavy utility belt, letting it drop to the floor with a loud clatter, and interlaced his fingers behind his head. "Trent, what are you doing?" Kane hissed, his face flushing crimson with a mix of rage and dawning panic. "We didn't do anything wrong. He resisted." "Brody, I swear to God I will shoot you where you stand," Brooks said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "I am years from my pension. I am not going to federal prison because you couldn't control your temper. Belt off!" Now. Slowly, the reality of the situation began to pierce through Kane's thick skull. With agonizing reluctance, he unclipped his belt. It hit the floor next to Quinn's. Brooks ordered 2 other desk officers who had just rushed into the room, hearing the commotion, to escort Kane and Quinn into holding cells 3 and 4, the very cells they had intended for Malik, as the heavy steel doors clanged shut, locking the 2 officers inside. The atmosphere in the precinct shifted from mundane bureaucracy to sheer, unadulterated panic. Brooks immediately called for a precinct-wide lockdown and frantically dialed Captain Grant Ellison, pulling him out of bed. The storm arrived without sirens and without chaotic flashing lights. Instead, 4 black, unmarked Chevrolet Suburbans screeched to a halt in front of the precinct, blocking the street entirely. The doors swung open in unison, and a dozen men and women wearing tactical vests emblazoned with Etum SBI, State Bureau of Investigation, poured out, moving with terrifying military precision. Leading the charge was Director Silas Kane, a seasoned investigator with a no-nonsense reputation. But the man walking beside him was the one who commanded the room the moment he stepped through the double doors. Attorney General Roland Vance was a tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 50s. Even wearing a hastily thrown-on trench coat over a dress shirt, he radiated an aura of absolute, crushing authority. His eyes, sharp and predatory, instantly scanned the room. The busy precinct froze. Desk sergeants, patrolmen, and detectives stopped dead in their tracks. It was as if the Grim Reaper himself had just walked into the room. Roland's eyes locked onto the corner of the booking area. A team of paramedics, who had been called by Brooks, were carefully bandaging the deep laceration above Malik's eye. The boy's face was horribly swollen, his lips split, and he was holding his ribs, wincing with every breath. For a fleeting second, the terrifying facade of the Attorney General cracked, revealing the raw, agonizing heartbreak of a father seeing his child brutalized. Roland crossed the room in 3 massive strides. "Malik," he whispered, dropping to one knee beside the medical chair. He gently placed a hand on his son's uninjured shoulder. "I'm okay, Dad," Malik rasped, offering a weak, pained smile. "I remembered what you said. I didn't fight back." Roland swallowed hard, his jaw tightening so fiercely a muscle ticked in his cheek. He stood up, turning to the paramedics. "Is he stable?" "He has a minor concussion, several cracked ribs, and severe contusions, Mr. Vance," the lead medic replied nervously. "We need to transport him to Westbridge General for a full scan, but he will live. Take him. A full SBI security detail will follow you to the hospital," Roland commanded. He watched as they carefully loaded his son onto a gurney and wheeled him out. Once the doors closed behind Malik, Roland Vance turned to face the precinct. The heartbreak vanished completely, consumed by a righteous, calculated fury. He looked at Director Silas Kane. "Lock this building down. Nobody makes a phone call. Nobody leaves. Sever their access to the internal servers immediately," Roland ordered, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I want every scrap of footage from Cruiser 44, dash cam, body cam, audio to audio logs. I want it yesterday." Sergeant Brooks stepped forward, looking like a man walking to the gallows. "Mr. Attorney General, the officers are secured in the holding cells. We have their weapons and badges." Roland looked at Brooks with eyes like shards of ice. "Where is your commanding officer?" Before Brooks could answer, the rear office door slammed open, and Captain Grant Ellison rushed out, his uniform shirt half-tucked, out of breath. "Mr. Vance, sir, I assure you this is a massive misunderstanding. We investigate our own." "You investigate nothing," Roland interrupted, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. As of this second, the Westbridge County 4th Precinct is under the jurisdiction of the State Bureau of Investigation. You are relieved of your command, Captain Ellison. Step aside, or you will be arrested for obstruction of justice. Captain Ellison's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He looked at the heavily armed SBI agents securing his precinct. He slowly stepped back, realizing he was entirely powerless. The untouchable boys' club of Westbridge County had just been demolished. Inside the precinct's state-of-the-art evidence room, Director Silas Kane plugged a secure, encrypted drive into the mainframe. Attorney General Roland Vance and 2 senior SBI investigators stood around a high-definition monitor. We pulled the data directly from the cruiser's hard drive and the officer's body cameras, Kane explained, tapping a few keys. They didn't have time to delete or alter anything. Here's the dash cam footage from the moment of the stop. The screen flickered to life. The dark, rain-slicked road appeared. The officers' voices crackled through the speakers. Check this out. A rolling probable cause. Look at the rust on that quarter panel. You think a kid driving that piece of junk lives up in the heights? He's casing the neighborhood. I can smell it. Roland's hands curled into tight fists at his sides as he listened to Officer Kane profile his son in real time. He watched the cruiser aggressively ride Malik's bumper. He watched his son pull over safely, executing every single step perfectly. Then came the body cam footage. The sudden blinding light, Malik's calm, respectful voice. "Good evening, officer. My wallet is in my back right pocket, and the registration is in the glove compartment. I need to reach for them. Is that all right?" Then the explosion of violence. The screen shook violently as Kane lunged through the window. The sickening thud of Malik being thrown onto the pavement. The horrific high-pitched scream of the taser. "I'm not resisting. I'm complying." Malik's desperate pleas echoed in the quiet evidence room. The audio captured the distinct wet crunch of Quinn's boots striking Malik's ribs and the heavy blows to the back of his head. Throughout the entire ordeal, Malik's hands were flat on the ground. He never threw a punch. He never kicked. He only curled into a fetal position to survive. When the video finally ended with Kane's mocking laughter, the silence in the room was suffocating. Director Silas Kane, a man who had seen decades of gruesome crime scenes, looked physically ill. "It's worse than an assault, Roland," Kane said quietly. "It's a localized execution of power. They tortured him." Roland Vance did not blink. He did not yell. The coldness radiating from him was absolute. "Director Kane, prepare the arrest warrants. Deprivation of rights under color of law, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, falsifying a police report, and conspiracy to commit civil rights violations. I want them charged at the state level, and I am personally handing the federal charges over to the FBI field office in the morning." "Yes, sir." Kane nodded. "Bring Kane to interrogation room A," Roland commanded, straightening his tie. "I want a word with him." Minutes later, Brody Kane sat handcuffed to a steel table in the center of the glaringly bright interrogation room. He was sweating profusely, his arrogant demeanor entirely stripped away, replaced by the cornered panic of a rat in a trap. The heavy steel door opened. Roland Vance walked in, carrying a single manila folder. He did not sit down. He stood opposite Kane, looking down at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Mr. Vance, look! This is a mistake," Kane stammered, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a desperate rush. "Your son, he made a sudden movement. It was dark. We thought he was reaching for a weapon. My partner yelled, 'Gun!' We followed protocol. We have a right to defend ourselves." Roland opened the manila folder and tossed a stack of high-resolution, full-color photographs onto the table. They were freeze frames from the body cam footage. "Protocol," Roland repeated, the word dripping with venom. "Let us talk about protocol," Officer Kane. He pointed to the first photograph. It showed Malik's hands clearly visible, reaching for a yellow envelope. This is my son informing you of his actions, asking for permission, and reaching for his registration. A registration for a car that, according to your radio logs, you never even bothered to run the plates for before pulling him over. He pointed to the second photograph. It showed Malik face down on the pavement, his arms spread wide in surrender. This is my son offering zero resistance, completely compliant. He pointed to the third photograph, a horrifying angle showing Kane driving the taser into Malik's leg while Quinn punched him. And this is you, Officer Kane, executing a brutal, unjustified assault on a compliant citizen because you did not like the fact that a young black man in a beat-up car was driving through a neighborhood you deemed above his station. Kane swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the mirror, knowing the SBI was watching. I want my union rep. I'm not saying another word until my PBA delegate gets here. Roland leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the steel table, bringing his face inches from Kane's. Your union representative is not coming, Brody, Roland whispered, his voice dangerously low. The PBA was informed of the situation minutes ago. When they saw the preliminary charges and the dashcam footage, they immediately distanced themselves. They are not providing you with counsel. You are entirely alone. Kane's breath hitched. The last pillar of his defense had just collapsed. You thought you were dealing with a nobody, Roland continued, his eyes locking onto Kane's terrified gaze. You thought you could beat a boy in the dark, write up a fictitious police report, and let the system swallow him whole, just like you've done to a dozen other kids in this county. I have pulled your internal affairs file, Kane. I see the complaints. I see the excessive force reports that your captain conveniently swept under the rug. But you made a fatal miscalculation tonight. Roland stood up straight, buttoning his suit jacket. You didn't just assault a citizen. You assaulted my blood. I am the chief law enforcement officer of this state. I am the system you thought you controlled, and I am going to use every single resource at my disposal to ensure that you do not see the outside of a federal penitentiary for the next 25 years. Kane began to hyperventilate, tears of pure terror finally welling in his eyes. Please, please, I have a family. So do I, Roland replied coldly. And you nearly took him from me. Roland turned on his heel and walked out of the interrogation room, leaving the door open just enough for Kane to see the two federal FBI agents who had just arrived in the hallway carrying a fresh set of federal handcuffs. The karma he had sown over years of corruption had finally come to collect, and the price was his absolute ruin. By the time the sun rose, the Westbridge County 4th Precinct was a ghost town of its former self, entirely occupied by the State Bureau of Investigation and federal agents. The blue wall of silence, the unspoken code that bad cops rely on to shield each other from consequence, was not just breached. It was completely demolished. For Captain Grant Ellison, the humiliation of being stripped of his command in front of his subordinates was rapidly morphing into absolute desperation. He had spent years curating a culture of aggressive policing in Ridgewood, tacitly encouraging officers like Brody Kane to keep the riffraff out through whatever means necessary. Ellison knew that if the FBI started digging into the precinct's internal servers, they would not just find the assault on Malik Vance. They would find the ghost files, dozens of buried complaints, altered arrest reports, and systemic racial profiling directives. In a desperate move, Ellison pulled out an untraceable burner phone and dialed the personal number of Desk Sergeant Harlan Brooks. Brooks, who had just been released from an exhaustive SBI briefing, sat in his own driveway, exhausted and staring blankly at his steering wheel. His phone buzzed. "Yeah," Brooks answered, his voice hollow. "Harlan, it's Ellison," the captain hissed urgently. "Listen to me very carefully. They took my badge, but I still have friends at the county level. We can survive this, but you need to hold the line. When they ask about Kane's story, you tell them he was a model officer, and you need to wipe the backup drive in the evidence locker. You still have the master key. Do it, Harlan, or we all go down." Brooks closed his eyes. He thought about his pension, his impending retirement, and the terrifying power of Attorney General Roland Vance. But mostly, he thought about the blood pouring down Malik Vance's face, a boy who had done absolutely nothing wrong. "I can't do that, Grant," Brooks said softly. "You spineless coward," Ellison spat. "You think they'll spare you? You processed the booking. You're an accessory. You wipe that drive, or I swear to God I will pin the entire departmental cover-up on you. I will testify that you authorized the ghost files." "Are you sure about that, Grant?" A new voice interjected on the line. Ellison's blood ran cold. It was not Brooks. "This is Director Silas Kane of the SBI," the voice continued smoothly. "Sergeant Brooks has been sitting in my mobile command unit. He fully cooperated and surrendered his phone. We have just recorded you issuing a direct threat to a federal witness, ordering the destruction of evidence, and admitting to a departmental cover-up." Before Ellison could even drop the burner phone, 3 unmarked SUVs boxed his civilian car in from all sides. Heavily armed federal agents swarmed the vehicle, shattering the driver's side window when Ellison refused to unlock the doors. He was dragged out into the cold morning air, handcuffed, and read his Miranda rights on the pavement. The architect of the precinct's corruption was finally in chains. Meanwhile, inside the federal holding facility downtown, the reality of the situation was crushing the 2 arresting officers. They had been separated immediately, a classic interrogation tactic. Rookie Officer Trent Quinn sat in a sterile, windowless room, sobbing into his hands. A federal prosecutor, Adrian Holt, sat across from him, sliding a piece of paper across the table. "This is a proffer agreement, Trent," Holt said coldly. "We know Kane was the primary aggressor. We know he escalated the stop. But you struck a restrained, compliant teenager multiple times. You are facing up to 15 years in a federal penitentiary." Quinn hyperventilated, his chest heaving. "He told me to. Kane told me the kid was reaching for a gun. He was my training officer. I just did what he said." "Kane is currently in the next room," Holt replied, leaning back in his chair. "And he is telling my colleagues that you lost your nerve, that you yelled 'gun' and incited the panic, and that you delivered the unauthorized strikes while he was merely trying to secure the suspect. He is throwing you to the wolves, kid." Quinn's head snapped up, his tear-streaked face twisted with betrayal. "He's lying. The body cam shows it. He pulled him out." "The body cam shows both of you committing a felony," Holt corrected sharply. "Here is your only lifeline. You waive your right to a trial. You plead guilty to felony deprivation of civil rights and assault. You testify against Kane and Captain Ellison in open court. If you do that, I will recommend a reduced sentence of 7 years. You have minutes to decide before I take this deal to Kane and let him testify against you." Quinn did not need minutes. With his shaking hand, he snatched the pen and signed his life away, cementing his senior partner's doom. The heavy brass-studded oak doors of the federal district court swung open. The atmosphere inside the courtroom was electric, suffocatingly packed with local reporters, civil rights advocates, and tight-lipped state officials. The blue wall of silence had not just been breached, it had been leveled to its very foundations. At the prosecutor's table sat Adrian Holt, a ruthless federal prosecutor hand-picked by the Department of Justice to ensure absolute transparency and prevent any defense claims of a conflict of interest. Attorney General Roland Vance had formally recused his state office from the prosecution, handing the entire jurisdiction over to the federal government. But Roland was far from absent. He sat in the very front row of the gallery, dressed in a sharp, immaculate navy suit. Sitting right next to him was his son, The deep purple bruises and the horrific swelling that had once distorted Malik's face were completely gone, leaving behind a young man whose posture was perfect, his expression an unyielding mask of calm resolve. Across the aisle at the defense table sat Brody Kane. The transformation was startling. The arrogant, chest-thumping predator who had terrorized the streets of Ridgewood was dead. In his place sat a hollowed-out, rapidly aging man. He had lost weight in county lockup. His hair was noticeably thinning, and the oversized, standard-issue orange jumpsuit hung off his frame. His wrists were shackled to a heavy chain wrapped around his waist, the steel clinking softly every time he trembled. The trial had been a systematic, merciless slaughter of Kane's character and career. It began when former rookie officer Trent Quinn took the stand. Wearing his own prison uniform, Quinn wept openly as he detailed Kane's long-standing history of racial profiling and excessive force. Under oath, Quinn confessed that Kane had explicitly ordered him to fabricate the gun threat to justify the beating. Quinn's testimony shattered the defense's narrative, but it was only the beginning. Sergeant Harlan Brooks, testifying under a strict immunity deal, had handed over the precinct's encrypted ghost files. These digital records proved definitively that Captain Grant Ellison had actively shielded Kane from dozens of excessive force complaints over the years, deliberately targeting minority drivers passing through their wealthy suburb. But the final, undeniable nail in the coffin was the footage. Prosecutor Holt played the unedited high-definition body cam and dash cam videos on a massive screen for the jury. The courtroom sat in a horrified, breathless silence as the violence unfolded. They heard Kane's mocking, predatory tone. They watched Malik calmly explain his actions and ask for permission to reach for his registration. Then came the explosion of sheer brutality, the twisting of fabric, the sickening thud of Malik hitting the asphalt, the horrifying high-pitched crackle of 50,000 volts of electricity from the taser, and Quinn's heavy boots driving into the boy's ribs. When the video ended with Kane's cruel, malicious laughter echoing through the speakers, 3 jurors were visibly crying. Kane's defense attorney did not even attempt a cross-examination regarding the video. There was nothing to defend. It had taken the federal jury less than 2 hours to return a verdict. Guilty on all Duyebo federal charges. The Honorable Judge Corbin Hale, a jurist renowned for his absolute intolerance of police corruption, peered over his wire-rimmed reading glasses at the disgraced officer. Before this court hands down its sentence, Judge Hale's deep, resonant voice boomed through the mahogany-paneled room. The court recognizes the victim in this matter. Mr. Malik Vance, do you wish to make a victim impact statement? Malik stood up. A hush fell over the gallery. Kane, physically unable to meet the young man's eyes, stared firmly at the grain of the wooden defense table, his breathing shallow and rapid. Malik walked to the podium. He brought no notes. He needed none. He gripped the edges of the podium and looked directly at the man who had nearly taken his life. Officer Kane, Malik began, his voice steady, carrying a quiet, devastating power that commanded the entire room. On the night you pulled me over, you looked into my car, and you did not see a college student. You did not see an honor student or an aspiring architect or a citizen with constitutional rights. You saw a target. You saw an opportunity to exercise your own cruelty because you truly believed that your badge made you a god in the dark. Kane swallowed hard, a visible tremor shaking his shoulders. You thought I had no voice, Malik continued, leaning slightly forward. But the terrifying, heartbreaking truth of this trial is this. What if I had not been the Attorney General's son? What if I had just been a teenager, working a late shift with an overworked public defender and no resources? We all know the answer. You would have framed me. You would have sent me to a state penitentiary for a felony I did not commit, effectively destroying my future just to cover up your own savage temper. You have likely done it to others." Malik paused, letting the heavy truth of his words sink into the silent room. "That is the true tragedy of your existence. You shattered the public's trust, and you abused the sacred authority granted to you. But you did not break me. I survived you. And standing here today, watching you face the absolute justice you violently tried to deny me, I realize that you were not a monster. You were just a coward." Malik stepped away from the podium and returned to his seat next to his father. Roland did not say a word, but he placed a firm, deeply proud hand on his son's shoulder, his eyes locking onto Kane with cold, uncompromising finality. Judge Hale picked up his wooden gavel. The sharp crack made Kane violently flinch. "Brody Kane," Hale stated, his voice dripping with profound disgust. "You are a disgrace to the uniform you wore, a parasite on your community, and an affront to the Constitution you swore an oath to uphold. You operated a localized reign of terror, hiding behind a badge to execute your personal prejudices. You asked this court for leniency, citing your years of service, but the court will show you the exact amount of mercy you showed Malik Vance on that highway." Hale looked down at his final sentencing paperwork, adjusting his glasses. "On the federal count of deprivation of rights under color of law, resulting in severe bodily injury, I sentence you to 120 months. On the count of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, I sentence you to 120 months. On the count of witness tampering, falsifying federal records, and conspiracy, I sentence you to 60 months. These sentences are not concurrent. They are to be served consecutively." A collective gasp echoed through the gallery. Reporters frantically scribbled in their notepads. "That is a total of 300 months, 25 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, without the possibility of early parole," Hale finalized, his tone akin to dropping a steel vault door. "You will be transferred to USP Florence immediately. Federal marshals, remove him from my courtroom." Kane's legs gave out. He collapsed into his chair, letting out a loud, guttural sob that echoed pathetically off the high ceilings. Two massive federal marshals hauled him to his feet by his armpits, dragging him toward the rear holding door. Kane wept uncontrollably, his chains rattling loudly as he pleaded gibberish into the air, a final humiliating display of the cowardice Malik had just named. Captain Grant Ellison would later receive a 10-year federal sentence for his role in the systemic cover-up. His precious, heavily guarded pension entirely revoked and seized to pay civil damages. Trent Quinn would spend the next 7 years in a medium-security federal facility, a brutal, life-altering lesson in blindly following illegal orders. The Ridgewood Police Department was subjected to a massive federal consent decree. Its leadership was gutted entirely, dismantled, and rebuilt from the ground up under strict Department of Justice oversight. Outside the courthouse, the heavy midday sun broke through the overcast sky, shining warmly down on the wide marble steps. A sea of microphones and cameras waited at the bottom, reporters shouting overlapping questions, but Roland and Malik walked past them in dignified silence. When they finally reached the quiet sanctuary of their waiting town car, Roland stopped and turned to his son. The terrifying, ruthless Attorney General melted away, leaving only a deeply relieved father. "Are you ready to go home, Malik?" Roland asked gently. Malik looked back at the towering courthouse, taking a deep, unburdened breath of the crisp air. He looked at his father. A small, genuine smile finally broke across his face. "Yeah, Dad, I'm ready." The long, dark nightmare was definitively over. The untouchable monsters in uniform had been dragged into the blinding light. Their unchecked power stripped, their lives entirely ruined by the very system they arrogantly thought they controlled. Justice, cold, methodical, and absolute, had been served. If this story of absolute karma and the destruction of a corrupt system kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and let us know your thoughts. The abuse of power is a real issue, but stories like this remind us that the truth and the tape never lie. When good people stand their ground, the blue wall of silence inevitably crumbles. Share this video with your friends and family to spread awareness about knowing your rights during traffic stops. And make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling, true-life saga of justice served cold. Do you think 25 years was enough for Officer Kane, or did he deserve more?